Europe looks calm from the outside. Ancient cities, open borders, stable currencies. But beneath the surface, the entire continent is under pressure structural, geographic, economic, and demographic pressure that has been building silently for decades. This is not about one country collapsing. It's about a system stretched beyond its design limits. Europe is trying to function as a single body while its parts are aging, fragmenting, and pulling in opposite directions. Energy flows no longer match consumption. Populations are shrinking where production is needed most. Borders exist politically but not economically, and that imbalance is creating fractures no policy can fully seal. What makes this dangerous is not chaos but momentum. Once systems like this begin to slip, they don't fail, suddenly they cascade. One stress triggers another. One weakness exposes the next. And by the time it becomes visible to everyone, it's already too late to stop. This is not a prediction. It's a pressure test, and Europe is entering the critical phase. Europe's fragile geographic design. Europe looks powerful on paper. Dense cities, advanced economies, tight borders. But geographically, it is one of the most fragile systems ever built. Unlike continents protected by oceans or vast empty interiors, Europe is compressed. Too many nations, too many people, too close together. Its rivers, once the arteries of prosperity, are now vulnerabilities. The Rhine, Danube, and Elbe don't just carry goods. They tie economies together so tightly that when one section fails, the shock ripples across borders instantly. There is no isolation buffer, no room for error. Europe's borders are artificial scars left by centuries of conflict. They cut through ethnic lines, energy grids, and trade routes, forcing cooperation even when politics collapse. A disruption in one country doesn't stay local. It spreads. Refugees move fast. Supply chains snap. Inflation travels quicker than diplomacy. Energy is where geography becomes merciless. Europe is resource poor by design. It depends on imported gas, oil, rare earths, and food inputs that must travel through narrow corridors, pipelines crossing unstable regions, shipping lanes exposed to geopolitical pressure, and electrical grids stretched beyond safe margins. When energy flows smoothly, Europe functions. When it doesn't, the entire system strains at once. Population density amplifies everything. Europe has little empty space to absorb shock. Cities sit close together, infrastructure overlaps, and logistics operate on razor-thin margins. Any prolonged disruption, energy, migration, food, or finance doesn't slow Europe down. It overloads it. Even climate works against the continent. Rivers dry up in summer, freezing trade. Winters demand massive energy consumption just to survive. Floods and heat waves now hit regions that were never designed to handle them. Europe's geography assumed stability. The world no longer offers it. This is the uncomfortable truth. Europe isn't collapsing because of one crisis. It's vulnerable because of how it's built. Its geography demands constant balance, uninterrupted cooperation, and perfect timing. And when those conditions fail even briefly, the pressure doesn't leak out. It builds. The energy trap nobody escapes. Europe's greatest weakness isn't political division or military imbalance. It's energy. And unlike borders or alliances, energy cannot be improvised, voted away, or replaced overnight. Europe is a continent that consumes far more power than it produces. Its cities glow non-stop, its factories hum constantly, and its digital infrastructure never sleeps. Yet beneath that modern efficiency lies a fragile system built on dependence, pipelines crossing hostile borders, power grids stitched together across dozens of sovereign states, and supply chains that assume stability will always exist. Gas flows like blood through Europe's industrial heart. Interrupt that flow, and entire economies seize. Homes go dark. Prices explode. Governments panic. This isn't theoretical, it's structural. Europe lacks the geographic luxury of energy self-sufficiency. Its reserves are limited, unevenly distributed, and expensive to extract. What it doesn't have, it must import. And imports always come with leverage. Every pipeline is a pressure point. Every port is a vulnerability. Every choke point becomes a silent battlefield long before the first shot is fired. Electricity is no safer. Europe's power grid is deeply interconnected, designed for efficiency rather than resilience. One failure cascades into another. A shortage in one region doesn't stay local. It ripples outward, destabilizing neighbors that depend on shared supply. The same integration that once symbolized unity now magnifies risk. Attempts to decouple from external energy sources sound decisive, but geography refuses slogans. Building new infrastructure takes years. Replacing baseload power takes decades. Renewables, while growing, cannot yet carry the full weight of continental demand, especially during winters, droughts, or industrial surges. Energy transitions are slow. Crises are not. And then there's the cost. Energy scarcity doesn't just shut off lights, it reshapes society. Inflation surges. Manufacturing relocates or collapses. Political extremism feeds on public anger as living standards erode. Energy stress doesn't remain an economic issue. It becomes social, then political, then existential. This is why Europe can't escape the energy trap cleanly. Any abrupt shift risks destabilization. Any hesitation prolongs dependence. Any miscalculation compounds vulnerability. Geography has locked Europe into a narrow corridor of options. All of them costly, all of them dangerous if mishandled. Energy isn't just fuel here, it's leverage, timing, and survival. And as pressure builds across borders and grids, Europe isn't choosing between comfort and sacrifice. It's choosing between controlled strain and uncontrollable collapse. Demographics, the silent collapse. Europe's most dangerous crisis isn't loud. It isn't explosive. It doesn't arrive with tanks or missiles. It arrives quietly through empty classrooms, shrinking workforces, and a population growing older faster than it can be replaced. Across the continent, birth rates have fallen far below the level needed to sustain society. In many European countries, each new generation is significantly smaller than the one before it. This isn't a temporary dip, it's a structural collapse. Fewer children today means fewer workers tomorrow, fewer taxpayers, and fewer people capable of carrying the economic weight of an entire system built for growth. At the same time, Europe is aging at an unprecedented speed. Large portions of the population are moving into retirement, living longer lives that depend heavily on pensions, healthcare, and social support. These systems were designed decades ago for a world where 4 or 5 workers supported one retiree. In some countries, that ratio is rapidly approaching 1-to-1. The math doesn't work, and it never will again. Labor shortages are already visible. Entire industries are struggling to find workers: manufacturing, healthcare, transportation, agriculture. Productivity stalls, wages rise unevenly, and inflationary pressure builds. Governments respond by increasing borrowing, raising taxes, or cutting services, each option feeding public anger and political instability. Immigration has been used as a pressure valve, but it introduces its own complexities. Rapid population replacement without long-term integration strains housing, education, and social cohesion. When economic growth slows, these tensions don't fade, they intensify. Demographics quietly reshape politics, amplifying polarization and eroding trust in institutions. What makes this collapse so dangerous is its invisibility. There is no single moment of failure, no clear trigger, just a gradual weakening of the foundation beneath everything else: energy systems, militaries, welfare states, and democratic stability. An aging population is less adaptable, more risk-averse, and increasingly dependent on structures that are themselves under strain. Europe isn't facing a demographic problem. It's facing a demographic destiny. Once population curves bend downward, reversing them takes generations if it's even possible at all. And while leaders argue over policies and borders, the clock keeps moving in only one direction. This is how systems fail, not through sudden shocks, but through slow arithmetic that can't be outrun. Europe's future isn't collapsing tomorrow. It's quietly running out of people to hold it together. Economic interdependence breakdown. Europe's economy was never designed to function in isolation. It was engineered as a single, tightly interlocked machine, where every country depends on the others to keep moving. Germany manufactures. France stabilizes. Southern Europe consumes. Eastern Europe supplies labor. Northern ports move everything. When one part slows, the entire system feels it. When one part breaks, nothing compensates. This model worked brilliantly in an era of stability. Cheap energy flowed freely. Borders stayed open. Supply chains stretched across the continent without friction. A car built in Germany relied on components from Poland, software from France, metals from Spain, and energy sourced far beyond Europe's borders. Efficiency became the continent's greatest strength, but also its greatest vulnerability. Because interdependence removes redundancy. When shocks arrive, Europe cannot isolate damage. A disruption in shipping doesn't remain local. A banking crisis doesn't stay national. Inflation in one country spreads instantly through shared markets, shared currencies, and shared debt. The system amplifies stress instead of absorbing it. The euro itself intensifies this fragility. A shared currency means shared consequences, but not shared control. Nations with vastly different productivity levels, demographics, and economic health are locked into the same monetary framework. When crisis hits, some economies need stimulus while others need restraint. Europe cannot satisfy both at once. Then there's debt. Southern Europe carries enormous financial burdens. Northern Europe carries political responsibility for stability. This imbalance creates resentment on both sides. Creditors feel exploited, debtors feel constrained. Cooperation weakens precisely when unity is most needed. Global shocks make this worse. Trade slowdowns hit export-driven economies first. Rising interest rates strain already fragile governments. Sanctions, tariffs, and disrupted shipping lanes ripple across every sector simultaneously. Europe doesn't face problems one at a time. It faces them all at once. And unlike larger, more centralized economies, Europe struggles to respond quickly. Decisions require consensus across dozens of governments, each facing domestic pressure, elections, and political fragmentation. By the time agreements are reached, damage has already spread. This is the core danger. Europe's economic strength depends on perfect coordination in an imperfect world. The moment trust erodes, trade slows. The moment trade slows, debt grows. The moment debt grows, political unity fractures. Interdependence once made Europe prosperous. Now it ensures that when the system falters, there is nowhere to hide. Security pressure from every direction. Europe is not surrounded by oceans or protected by distance. It is compressed between pressures, exposed on every flank, and vulnerable in ways that modern maps make impossible to ignore. Security threats do not approach Europe from one direction, they converge on it simultaneously. To the east lies Russia, a vast land power with depth, resources, and a long memory of invasion routes across the European plain. Europe's eastern border has no natural wall, no mountains, no deserts, no oceans. It is an open corridor. From the Baltics through Poland down to the Black Sea, this flat geography has historically invited conflict, not prevented it. Every military buildup here triggers fear not because of ideology, but because geography makes rapid escalation unavoidable. To the south, pressure arrives in waves rather than armies. Migration routes from North Africa and the Middle East funnel directly into Europe through the Mediterranean. This is not just a humanitarian issue, it is a security one shaped by geography. Narrow sea crossings, fragile coastal states, and porous borders mean that instability anywhere south of Europe eventually moves north. Conflict, famine, or collapse doesn't stay contained. It flows. To the southeast, the Middle East remains a constant source of volatility. Energy routes, trade corridors, and political fault lines intersect here. Any disruption, war, sanctions, Regime collapse reverberates through European markets, energy grids, and internal politics almost immediately. Europe is close enough to feel every shock, but distant enough to struggle to control outcomes. To the north, a new frontier is opening. The Arctic, once frozen and irrelevant, is becoming navigable. New shipping lanes, resource claims, and military posturing are transforming the region into another competitive space. Europe's northern states suddenly face exposure from a direction that historically offered protection. And layered across all of this is a domain with no borders at all: cyber and hybrid warfare. Power grids, financial systems, transportation networks, and media ecosystems are all targets. Europe's dense connectivity, once its strength, becomes a vulnerability. Disruption doesn't require tanks or missiles. It requires access, timing, and pressure applied at the weakest point. What makes this uniquely dangerous is convergence. These pressures don't arrive one at a time. They overlap. A migration surge strains politics, while energy disruptions strain economies, while military posturing strains unity, while cyber attacks erode trust. Geography ensures that none of these threats can be isolated. Europe is being squeezed not by a single enemy, but by its position on the map. Security here is no longer about defense alone. It's about endurance. And geography is testing how much pressure this system can absorb before something gives. Internal fracture lines. Europe's greatest vulnerability is not external. It is internal. Beneath the image of unity, treaties, and shared values lies a continent pulled apart by invisible fault lines that have never truly healed. When pressure increases, these fractures widen, and Europe is now under more pressure than at any point since the Cold War. The divide between North and South is economic, but deeply psychological. Wealthier northern states prioritize fiscal discipline, efficiency, and export-driven growth. Southern nations rely more heavily on debt, tourism, and social spending. In calm times, this imbalance is managed through compromises and bailouts. In crisis, it becomes resentment. One side feels exploited, the other feels abandoned. Trust erodes quietly, then suddenly all at once. East and West face an even sharper split. Eastern European states carry historical trauma shaped by occupation, insecurity, and survival. Their priorities are defense, sovereignty, and cultural preservation. Western Europe, built on decades of stability, leans toward diplomacy, regulation, and consensus. These worldviews clash during moments that demand fast, unified action. What one side calls caution, the other sees as weakness. What one calls protection, the other labels extremism. Nationalism thrives in this environment not as an ideology, but as a reflex. When systems feel distant and unresponsive, people retreat inward. Borders regain emotional meaning. Political movements rise, promising control, certainty, and identity. Not because unity failed, but because it stopped feeling personal. The more centralized Europe becomes, the more local fears grow. Language, culture, and history compound the tension. Europe is not one story, it is dozens layered on top of each other. Shared institutions cannot erase centuries of rivalry, memory, and mistrust. When economic growth slows and security threats rise, those old stories return. Blame looks for a target. Cooperation becomes conditional. The myth of permanent unity is Europe's most dangerous illusion. Unity requires constant energy, shared sacrifice, and trust in outcomes that are no longer guaranteed. When crises stack energy shortages, migration pressure, economic slowdown, the cost of compromise feels higher than the cost of defiance. And so the fractures deepen quietly. Not with explosions, but with elections. Not with invasions, but with vetoes. Not with revolutions, but with refusals. Europe is not breaking apart dramatically. It is drifting. And history shows that drifting continents don't need enemies to collide, they only need pressure, time, and unresolved divides. The escalation window, 500 words, Europe does not collapse all at once. It fractures in windows, short moments where pressure, timing, and miscalculation collide. History shows that catastrophes rarely arrive with warning sirens. They arrive during transitions, when systems are already strained and resilience is at its weakest. Europe is entering one of those windows now. The danger is not a single crisis. It's the interaction between crises. An energy disruption alone is survivable. A demographic slowdown alone is manageable. Economic stagnation alone can be endured. But when these shocks overlap, when they hit simultaneously or in rapid succession, they begin feeding off each other. What starts as stress becomes acceleration. In this window, timing matters more than intent. Governments may act responsibly, markets may attempt to stabilize, and institutions may follow their mandates, but the system itself becomes unstable. A delayed response to an energy shortage triggers industrial slowdowns. Industrial slowdowns reduce tax revenue. Reduced revenue weakens social support systems. Social strain fuels political extremism. Extremism paralyzes decision-making. And suddenly, no single actor is in control of the trajectory anymore. Europe's interconnectedness, once its greatest strength, becomes its greatest liability during escalation windows. A failure in one region propagates instantly across borders. Power grids don't respect national sovereignty. Financial markets don't pause for political compromise. Migration pressures don't wait for elections. Each shock compresses response time until leaders are forced to react rather than plan. Escalation windows are especially dangerous because they reward speed, not wisdom. Decisions made under urgency lock in outcomes for decades. Emergency measures become permanent policies. Temporary alliances harden into dependency. Short-term fixes create long-term fragility. And once momentum builds, reversing it becomes exponentially harder. What makes this moment uniquely dangerous is that Europe's margin for error is shrinking. Aging populations mean fewer workers to absorb shocks. Fiscal constraints limit stimulus options. Energy diversification takes years, not months. Security threats are no longer distant. They are constant, multi-directional, and increasingly hybrid. There is no reset button. Most catastrophes are not caused by villains or grand conspiracies. They emerge when systems cross thresholds without realizing it. Europe is approaching several thresholds at once, and escalation windows don't announce themselves when they open. They're only obvious in hindsight when the costs are already irreversible. This is the point where history changes direction quietly. Not with explosions, but with missed chances. Not with declarations, but with delays.